we interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Well, you know, growing up in New Orleans, born in 1958, or the winter a very long time ago, I grew up around, saw the mafia all the time. And that was quite, criminal activity. It was New Orleans. Of course, there's criminal activity. But, that was my first time. I didn't really know that much about gangs. But then when I joined the military, I think the first time I really get hit in the face with this was, it was around 1981 or 82. I was in Panama at Fort Sherman, back before we decided to give all that away. And one time we used to go to the movies. The Army was different in those days. It wasn't that spectacular, if you remember. It was kind of crap. But so we'd go down and see the movies. We went to see this movie, and it was called The Warriors. I don't remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, we laughed. We thought that was funny as hell. The baseball players and all that stuff. Well, afterwards, we were kind of retreat back to the lagoon area. There was a big lagoon and had some bleachers out there because they used to do demonstrations out there. It's late at night. We're smoking cigars and drinking beer like all young men trying to be grown-ups. And I remember we had a young man. He was from Chicago. And we're laughing about this movie. And this young man starts telling us, well, I'm from Chicago, and there's a gang there called the Gangster Disciples. And they got over 1,000 members. And I remember we laughed so hard at this kid. We were like, yeah, okay, Buck. Yeah, 1,000 freaking people. Right. I had no freaking clue.
Yeah.
I had no clue that was going to come back to bite me in the ass. I mean, I look back now. I mean, he wasn't even around by the time I found out about Gangster, but I sure was embarrassed when I look back on it. But but then, of course, years go by. I get out of the military. Did a quick stint with the fire department. Even had a drive-by shooting on me while I was out at the fire department. I was like, I told him, I said, God, if I'm going to live in this hell called Fayetteville, I want a gun too. And I walked across the street and changed professions that night and became a cop. And shortly after becoming a cop, it's Fayetteville. It was rock and roll. It's a wild place. And the first time I get hit with this again is they make me a school resource officer. Now, our chief was kind of a different kind of a character. You see, he said he brought us all in one day. We didn't know what was happening. He brought all these different officers in, and they're all going, "Come on, Gator." What? That was my nickname, Gator. What is all this about? And I looked around the room and I said, "Looking at everybody in here, this is going to be a cross-cultural sensitivity course." I mean, I'm just looking at the faces, and the chief basically comes in and says, "No, we have been given these schools within the city, and you're going to be SROs." And of course, someone says, "Well, isn't that for retired officers?" And he said, "No, kids need to be able to go to school and have respect for a law enforcement officer. If they're bad, they can stay home, or they can come to school and they can behave." And that's what he expected from us. He didn't expect us to try and be fatherly figures or motherly figures. And sure enough, I started off and I ran across a young girl by the name of Christine Walters. She was on death row, but she's been doing life now. And that comes into play. Little girl, she was mixed, it's military community, so you have everybody there. And in fact, the majority of your population is military. And I remember Christine, one day, this little girl always had a chip on her shoulder, and tiny little thing, but she was very dynamic. And I would let her come down to my office and just bitch, and the principal would say she's not going to class. I said, "Well, if you let her go to class, then nobody's going to get anything done." And I would just listen to her. And one day I saw a scar on her arm, and now I was like, "What am I looking at?" And she pulls her sleeve up, and she's got a 6-pointed star, and it's burned into her arm. So and I'm like, whoa, what kind of abuse am I looking at, right? And she goes, no, this is my family. I'm down with this. This is my set. And I was like, "What the hell are you talking about, child?" And then she proceeds to tell me about gang life. Now, understand, she's probably about 14 or 15 at this point.
Mhm.
And the way she's talking, she's telling me, she's got control over grown ass men. And I'm like, yeah, right. You're a child. But anyway, never say never. That's the golden rule. And I remember she told me, I said, well, how long you been in this gang? And she goes, well, I've been in the gang since since I was 10. And I was like, okay. Okay, where
Mhm.
did you get jumped into the gang? And she goes, in Italy, when my father was stationed, my stepfather was stationed at the Air Force. And I said, no, who jumped you in? I'm thinking, I can't believe there's a bunch of Italians out there, jumping you in a gang. She said, oh, they were dependents and some full-time members. I'm like, wait a minute. You're telling me that a criminal organization, and we're talking
Mhm.
probably let's see if that was around 90 something. We're talking that was probably around 1990. She's talking about 91. And sure, I mean that's very possible. I can't throw that out the window. Uh,
Mhm.
but you got to think about it. It's the Air Force, which is possibly the strictest outside of the Marine Corps, but that's a different story too. And I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of different. And I didn't believe her that much at first, but man, she had knowledge. She had real knowledge. Later, she was able to validate criminal offenses. Where only an eyewitness could have had those at other locations. And I remember her saying one time to me, I had a girlfriend over at the mall, and my girlfriend was talking about how scary it was getting because there were some shootings out there. And I joked with her and I said, hey, here's the deal, Christine. I want to know one thing. If you're so powerful, can you why don't you do something about those damn shootings out at the mall? She goes, you want me to stop that? She called me dad all the time. You want me to stop
Mhm.
that, Dad? I said, yeah, I want you to stop that. I was just joking, and it stopped. It
Mhm.
just flat out stopped. I'm saying, wait, 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 wait. No, no, now I done stepped in something stinky
Mhm.
too.
Mhm.
And yeah, she ended up involved in a double murder, an execution, gang initiation with for the her set and Roland 60s, and she was the leader. She showed them. They kidnapped one woman from Bojangles, and they took her out to Fort Bragg, and they shot her, but she survived. The girl crawled forever and ran into a army medic. Just happened to be an army medic coming down the road in a jeep and got out
Mm.
and saved her. Um, but then they went and picked up two dancers, which I think there's more to that story, but that's just another day. It's never easy, right? I'm a shit
Mhm.
magnet. Whatever I get, it just gets bigger. So that one was, yeah, that one's more like a hit. And they took the girls out and they talked about killing them in front of them. A lot of terrorizing, and people don't realize the perversion and the depravity that goes on in the gang world. And so, they literally mentally tortured these girls. As a matter of fact, one of them was in the trunk, called her father before she died and said, they're going to kill me. And of course, unfortunately, that father didn't get to hear that because he got on his message machine. And pretty sad
Mhm.
state of affairs. They bragged about how they killed him, and it didn't really hit him until, like, one guy told me, it didn't hit him until they went to see the warden, and they were told to strip down in front of the warden, and then they were handed red jumpsuits because they were Crips, and that was kind of like a double insult. And
Mhm.
then the guy told him, well, you're never leaving here. And that's when he says that suit looked like it weighed about 100 pounds.
Mm.
But during my time dealing with Christine, I ran across a letter that she had, and the guy was an E7, and
Mhm.
E7 in the Army. And he's writing and talking about, you need to quit hanging out with these young gangsters. You need to hang out with the real gangsters like me. And and if you followed my lead, and he's talking about being a gangster disciple. And then right on top of that, I had one of the SWAT guys come in, and he says, hey, I don't know, this might be something you're interested in, but at this point I was on the gang unit. And he says, he says, I was down at the Jim's Pond, where used to be the biggest gun dealer on the East Coast, and they have a nice range. And he said, yeah, there was this guy in there, had a couple of AK-47s. And I was like, well, why is he just shooting just AK? And he was zeroing them. And he said, he followed the guy out. And he just starts talking. The guy was very blunt. He was a staff sergeant in the Army. And he just starts talking about, oh, yeah. Well, you know, I'm a ranking member with the Gangster Disciples. And yeah. And I kind of, you know, these are our guns. And he's like, look, this guy's in the Army, right? So he gives me that information. And of course, I transfer it to Bragg. It's kind of a mess. Army CID is now they're actual federal officers. But for a long time, it's just like anything else. They always get mad because they always want to try and pretend they're a unison. But that's not true. It's just like you can have a good police department and then 10 years from now have the worst police department around. It all depends on the dynamics. At that time, you know, they were kind of active. They did a few things, but then we went through a really bad time when the war broke out. We had a big problem. They didn't want to address actual issues. That didn't happen. No, it did happen. I'm looking right at it, you know, and they would get very, very angry with me. Of course, they would tell people I wasn't patriotic. I'm sitting there going, no, the 8.5 years I did had nothing to do with nothing, right?
Right.
Yeah, airborne the whole time. Yeah, no, special ops, 82nd. Yeah, I'm not a veteran. I'm not a good veteran. But yeah, we just, you know, it was kind of humorous. We had a lot of situations like that. Later I was, like I said, I was put on the gang unit fairly early. And when they realized that, you know, wearing suits and ties wasn't going to get it. And so they put us, we wore plain clothes. You could see our badge and guns, but gang members are closer to the bone, as I call it, you know. So wearing a suit and tie, kind of that's okay if you want to do an intimidation factor. But the truth is, you're never going to get anything out of these guys until you get. Now that's fine for like in an interview room or something like that. But on the street, I was always out there. I mean, I could walk up and talk to them, and it was pretty fine as long as they knew I was a cop. I didn't try and hide from them. I mean, I did do some. I did do some stuff with like when my partner and I would travel to do like Klan rallies or stuff like that, and I would just mix myself in with the crowd. And that was, of course, that's a different story. I love that people always talk about the great white supremacy. I'm sorry. It's just not there, man. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not picking, but the biggest amount I ever saw of a Klan was down in South Carolina. And that was for the Sons of the Confederacy. And the Sons of the Confederacy asked them to leave because they'd come all the way down from Ohio. And there was like about 20 of them. Then we went to High Point which was advertised as the biggest Klan march in recent history. And my partner and I went up there. And if the Nazi Party hadn't showed up with their 6 members, they wouldn't have had enough people to do the march. And of course, everybody was a grand poobah 3 times over. You know, I grew up in New Orleans. I was in the crowd screaming, "Throw me something, mister," because they look like they look like Mardi Gras. And I mean, it was funny.
Real quickly, that was one of the things that I used to say, you know, all the time when people, either I was on patrol, gangs, or whatever, people kind of throw it in your face and they're like, you know, why are y'all messing with everybody on the block when the Klan's out there doing this and that? And I'm like, man, first of all, I grew up here. I remember when the Klan would march, you know, as a little kid. I was terrified because at the time that Glenn Miller was like their leader and his, you know, background that is kind of crazy. But I'm like, but at that time, you know, you're talking about whatever, early 2000s, mid 2000s. I'm like, they're done. They've been done for so long. And we were fortunate, at least in our area, you know, you and me, that we didn't have a force kind of to take their place, like a new brand or whatever. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's out there. You just don't know it. I'm like,
the invisible,
like,
the invisible empire.
I was like, no, like it was, you know, something decades ago. And guess what? between the FBI and local law enforcement and people working, undercover and flipping informants and destroying them from within, they're gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like one of the greatest lessons in history that when agencies put somebody in their crosshairs like that, they're done. And so that's why I used to always tell people, like, no, the biggest threat we're dealing with right now in this city or even in this area of the state has nothing to do with, the plan or anything. It is gang versus gang. And the demographics are, young black males that are getting killed at an alarming rate. And this is all from within. So yeah, I'm gonna be on the block. Yeah, we're gonna put a lot of attention on Bloods, Crips, Gangster Disciples. Like, yeah. So getting back to what you were talking about, you kind of mentioned, Gangster Disciples, Rolling 60s. I do want to say now, for the really like locked in officers and detectives and agents who are working gangs, if they don't know the history or don't know how things kind of permeated outside of Chicago and outside of LA, Reader's Digest is late 80s, early 90s, there was the 8-ball, like the peace accord.
Correct.
Between Gangster Disciples flowing out of Chicago, right, Crips flowing out of Los Angeles, and somewhere around St. Louis, that area, Kansas City, all that.
The creative edict, yes.
Yeah. And so back then in the 90s, oftentimes symbols were utilized and interchanged. So
sure,
people would ask me that, and they're like, okay, well, now why is it the 8-ball? And you and I know this, but like for the listeners, if you're watching, it's the pitchfork. So it's like the Gangster Disciple pitchfork's nothing but the middle finger going straight up, index finger and thumb make kind of a U, so it looks like a pitchfork. And then a Crip C. So you got a Gangster Disciple pitchfork, a Crip C, and when you put them together, it makes an 8 for the 8-ball. That's
the 8-ball alliance, and of course the 8-ball nation. Yeah. And that's why that alliance was done with East Coast Crips, not West Coast Crips. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's very confusing to a lot of people when they go, well, this guy's a Crip, but he's got all this Gangster Disciple knowledge on him. Mm-hmm. And that's true, because if you go out to the West, they don't do that. And so it can be very confusing. Working gangs is it's addictive. I mean, think about it. I did it for all those years. Then I traveled for more years all over the United States, and here I am at 66, and I'm sitting over here, and I get constant requests from different people. I do interviews for lawyers. I have a lot of that where lawyers that call me and they go, well, I hear you can talk to a gang member.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, I can. I do speak gangsterese, I guess. I speak sovereign citizen. I also speak, extremism and cult, and but it's interesting when you go out there. But so as I was telling you earlier, and it's going to be in our book. I'm currently writing a book with a friend of mine, and Dave Schilling, who's an expert on white supremacy and Norse symbols and symbology and that type of thing. So I asked Dave to take over my work because I was having some health issues, and he'll be the guy who will retain that. And one of the things that goes back is I kept saying to myself, as I went through gangs, I look at problem solving. When that's the best way to be a detective, is to be a problem solver. And I used to tell guys, if you're working with something that you don't understand, find something that you do understand. And then, like, in other words, if I'm a young detective and I'm trying to work something, okay, let's take a look at it. Are you a mechanic? Yeah, I'm a mechanic. All right, so who's the carburetor? Okay, who's the onboard computer? All right, there you go. And that's how you start. Now the gang starts, or the cult, or whatever, the organization starts to make more sense to you. Now, as a young man, I got kicked out of public school in the state of Louisiana, which it was, hey, now you got to go learn to read and write. And the only place it would take me was a seminary. And and so I did have a background in theology. And so when I started looking at gangs, I realized, wow, these gangs are very cult-like. There wasn't a whole lot of difference. And I started recognizing, how they operated. You know, the OG was the priest with all the knowledge, and then you had the deacons, which were the enforcers, and you just work your way down. Now, but what I was getting back to is, so I was sitting in my office and I'm trying to figure out, okay, so if the groups like the Vice Lords and the Latin Kings and the Maniac Latin Disciples and, you know, different groups, Gangster Disciples, and these are all out of like older places, Chicago, they're older gangs.
Yeah.
But why is it we understood Crip and Blood more than anything else? Why did I see so much Crip and Blood activity? It seems that would be the other way around. They were out on the West Coast. What were they doing over here? And so it was the craziest thing. I was talking with my old boss and a co-worker there, Bridgman, and we were said, Mark Bridgman, and we decided to take a trip over to the old lockup. We went over to there's an old jailhouse in Fayetteville. It's an old courthouse, and the jail was on the very top of it. And it still has the old cells up there. As a matter of fact, it's been in, they've used it in quite a few movies and stuff because it still operates. I mean, they don't put anybody in there. It hadn't had anybody in there since the 70s. And I went upstairs, and we go into where they used to be. And now, this is true. This used to be the black holding section when it was originally built, which was very, very cramped, where you put 3 people in there and somebody had to stand. And so you do see that old sign of racism there. But later, it was used as a drunk tank. And, of course, the majority of our drunks were soldiers. And, you know, they always are. And when you start looking at the graffiti, because they were allowed to pencil, so when you would see the graffiti, you start looking on the walls, and you're seeing 6-pointed stars. You're seeing pitchforks. You're seeing Crip. You're seeing Blood. But mostly you're seeing Crip and Blood stuff, right? And maybe a few Latino gangs. And you're going, what in the hell? And you're sitting there going, sure was a lot of this going on. Well, I had to go back and I said, well, let me think about that. That's a clue. That's what we call a clue, you know. And so I said, well, let me see what was going on during that time period. That's one of the things I'm big on. What was happening? Because you usually have it. And we had the Watts riots. Okay. And then I started talking to some people out there that had been in law enforcement during that time period. And they said, well, yeah, a lot of these guys were getting picked up, but no one wanted to be the guy that put the black guy behind bars. All right. Because it was a civil rights movement, stuff like that. And these guys were, you know, they didn't want to portray them as evil, bad guys doing bad things. So they got an offer: go in the Army or go in the military or go to prison. Well, knowing damn well they're going to take the military. Yeah. And so you go back and you start looking everywhere around the country, the most popular military reservations at that time. And that's when you'll see the early forms of gangs. Now, the problem with that is still exists to this very day is you join the military. And back in those days, the military was still hard. You know, you came in. I was a little bit ahead of you, but, you know, back in those days, you know, I didn't even know what a flat dick motherfucker was, but I was one, you know, according to the drill sergeant. And I learned all kinds of things about it when I was in basic training in those days. I found out that I was also a dickless bitch, and that the drill sergeant would let me know when I grew one, which biologically takes 6 weeks. And I didn't know that either. So. But, you know, so the military was much different in those days. And it looks like we're going to try and get back to that. It was a lot harder. And so a lot of guys came in and they didn't fit. They didn't make it. They got kicked out of the military. They went AWOL. But they weren't going back home. No, they're not going back to Cali where you got to. But I can be. And here's the other thing about that. Why would I go back to Cali where I was a foot soldier when I can be an OG here? Yeah. As simple as that. And we saw it all the time here. And so that's when you start seeing the gangs coming alive, the Crips and the Bloods, more than anything else. And then followed by Gangster Disciples because of just by the sheer volume of Gangster Disciples. And the same thing with the Latin Kings, our almighty Latin King Queen Nation. But yeah, so that's when we started seeing it. And then I started making note. We started arresting, when we'd get these constant reports for tattoos and stuff. And then the war breaks out, which made it worse. We had gang members in the military. We knew that. And we even, we had guys, MPs, everything. It was kind of like like a dirty secret. A couple of I did a lot of work with the military police investigators, which handle less than the felonies. The CID would handle the bigger felonies, but these guys would be down at the clubs, and they did a great video. I think you may have seen it. It's been on TV. I've given it out for years. You see the guys on the dance floor, everybody, and the DJ. This is on post. The biggest club there. And he goes, throw them up. And they all start throwing their gang hand signs up. And then you see they're all on the dance floor. They're Crips and Gangster GDs. And then you see a group of Bloods on the other side throwing them up. And then a fight breaks out. And people, those are civilians. No, they weren't all civilians.
Yeah.
There's plenty of clubs to go to in Fayetteville. That wasn't all civilians. And we started getting a lot more. It seemed like every time we were arresting somebody, they were from Fort Bragg and they were a gang member. And the other half of that is, I jokingly call it the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air syndrome. So you have the ones where, this guy does come in the military. He does use it to escape the gangs, which is rare. I'm not picking. It is rare. And he leaves the gangs behind, and he's doing pretty good. He says he's about an E6 or something. And mom and daddy have their little shit back home in LA, and he's up there creating a lot of problems and stuff like that. And the family goes, you know what? You're going to go live with your brother because he's in the 82nd Airborne Division. He's in the Marine Corps, and he's going to straighten you out. And then he gets there, and the brother's like, I ain't got time for this. I'm in the damn army. I'm working 9 to 5, man. And then you're going to destroy my security. No, hell no. Get the hell out of my house. He ain't going back home. No, he's sticking right here. In fact, I used to joke, anytime we came across a new gang, I always gave it 6 weeks before we would see it in Fayetteville. I remember Tango Blasters out of Texas. Very few people even knew who they were. And in fact, first time I heard it, I was like, Tango Blast sounds like a drink, right? Yeah. Damn, I'm gonna get me a Tango Blaster. And maybe Tang with some vodka or something. And anyway, sure as hell, it was no less than 6 weeks later, we see Tango Blaster graffiti in Fayetteville. And I was like, well, there you go. They're here now. And that's another thing people don't understand. We saw that all the time. It's just like the MS-13 and these guys. We trained Maras in Central America and Nicaragua. We trained the Maras, which later would become Mara Salvatrucha. And most people don't understand. Mara Salvatrucha, MS-13 did not start in Central America. MS-13 started in the United States.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a big misnomer. Same thing with 18th Street. 18th Street is huge down in Central America. And we laugh about that because people are like, well, I said, they don't have an 18th Street there. All right. That came from 18th Street out of Los Angeles. And the 13, of course, is from the La M.A. Edict, where the Mexican mafia made their truces with MS-13 or Mara Salvatrucha. And they carry that 13. 13 is the 13th letter of the alphabet, M or M-A, La M-A. Of course, we all know that drugs don't flow in the United States unless they flow through La M-A first. And so we start seeing that. And of course, people are ignorant. I can still remember way back in the early 90s, some of the smaller police departments out here in the rural areas talking about, some bad luck girl this guy was talking about. I said, what? He goes, the bad luck lady. And I went, the bad luck lady? What the hell are you talking about? He goes, Miss 13.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, all right, that's fine. Yeah. And I'm sure you ran across this too when you had to go out and talk. And everybody talks about devil worship. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
good Lord. And I'd ask him, I said, finding a devil worshiper is like finding an actual clan member, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're talking to a devil worshiper, he's not a real one. He's not going to tell you. I mean, I had a woman tell me, yeah, I see him all the time. I said, you do? I love talking to a crazy person. And I said, where do you see him? She goes, at the coffee shops. And I go, oh, they all wear black. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's the great plan of Satan. That's he's going to take over the coffee shops. We're all going to be really
Mm-hmm.
tired. Not going to be able to get our coffee in the morning. It's going to topple society.
Mm-hmm.
But oh yeah, and the upside down, oh, that's a Baphomet. No, that's just Crips disrespecting blood.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's why it's on a stop sign, spray painted with
Mm-hmm.
with red.
Now, one thing that is interesting is when you mention like 18th Street. And real quick for the listeners, 18th Street goes way, way back, decades and decades.
Yes,
Out of LA from 18th Street, Clanton Street, like that. There's a
correct.
whole history involved.
Yeah,
But what's interesting is through the evolution of the gang now, and especially out here on the East Coast, we've got 18th Street members everywhere. But you'll see 666s, 666, like
yep.
tattooed on their body. And
I
so
went through that.
yeah, so like we had a lot of them in our area, and they were like going wild, like a lot of gunplay. They were robbing Bloods, and
Super
basically,
violent.
yes, and so when people would encounter them and photograph them, and then we would get it on the intel side or on the suppression side, and it's like, yeah, the 666s, that's 6 plus 6 plus 6 equals
18. Yeah.
But on the surface too, it's kind of like psyops. It's like showing the enemy, yeah, we're into devil worshiping, or like kind of like MS, and the devil horns and that sort of thing. But reading those symbols and what I had learned, and it as well, is like the more intel we would share to officers, the more we would get in return. So it was like I would go in and teach. Yeah, I'd go in and teach a block of, say, hey, these are the indicators of 18th Street. This is basically some of the key figures we have out here. We're going to go through that. We're going to go through, BPA 13, and then we're going to go through whatever, vice lords. And I might teach 2 or 3 at a meeting. And then within a week, someone's hitting me back, like you're saying, like out of Bragg or out of a Charlotte area or wherever, North Carolina. And they would be like, yeah, we're seeing it too. And that we were misreading the signs, or we were thinking that the 666s that we were seeing on graffiti was just some, kid messing around with devil worship or whatever.
Well, yeah, it's just like I always joke about the smiley face murders. That, to me, you're never going to get me. I won't say the name of the news show. I've done a lot of TV. I've done every freaking network there is. And I had one call me one time. They said, we're going to talk about the smiley face murders. I said, please don't do that. That is the biggest lump of crap I've ever heard. They go, no, but I said, look, I can go to any college town. Hell, I can go to pretty much any town, and I can find graffiti with 3 miles of any incident you come up with. And there's going to be a smiley face there. And they go, why? I said, because it's the easiest thing to paint.
Yeah.
It's simple. It's not a conspiracy.
And here's a great idea. If it's linked to a murder, why in the world does it have to be 3 miles away? Like if it's on the crime scene, yeah, okay. I'll give it to you there. But you tell me, oh, we found a smiley face, whatever, spray painted or Sharpie up on a wall. Come on. Now I've heard just a little bit of that myself, and I'm like, I hate when people do that, Then that's why it's important. Like when you were like on the forefront of the whole gang movement, well, not the forefront of the movement, but of law enforcement actually recognizing it, documenting it.
Oh yeah.
And creating a strategy. Now you had mentioned the military, and I throw this book out all the time. And for the listeners, it's called Gangs in the Military. It's by Carter F. Smith, but you're one of, if not the primary source of law enforcement side information on that book. And the book basically documents going back to when in the mid 90s, and correct me, man, I'm jumping in and kind of abbreviating, but Nazi skinheads that had actually attacked a
Correct.
biracial couple in
Correct.
the Fort Bragg, Fayetteville area.
Yeah.
So then the military CID starts an investigation and realizes, hey, we need to find out how bad this problem is within the Army.
Yes.
I can remember in my unit, I was an infantry unit, and the company commander, you had to go into his office one at a time. During this investigation, it was all over all these infantry units all over the Army. And I didn't know at the time what was going on. I just go in there, and you have to get naked, and any tattoos or body, scarring, modifications that we had on our body, we had to then explain. And I remember thinking this was kind of strange, and depending on what unit you're in and what phase, it's like, I don't know, I just do what I'm told. But I remember thinking, like, this is kind of wild. And then later, I saw the presentation that Carter did, and I bought the book, read it, and you and I have talked for now years and years. But now it makes sense why they were doing what they were doing back then. But then to find out when the Army starts one investigation, they find out, the good news is our neo-Nazi skinheads are not that large in the Army, but we have stumbled upon, Gangster Disciples, a huge gang presence in the military, which you alluded to seeing that in your area because you were locked in. Now, if I remember right, though, there was a little bit of pushback from the military when they were when CID, or at least Carter and his people, were trying to acknowledge that, right?
Well, Carter was he was very active, and I'll give him that. He later becomes a professor. He's a very smart fella, and a really good guy. And I remember there was a retired CID agent that still worked out at CID, and said, I may regret this. And he did, by letting you two guys meet. And once we introduced each other, we were both in the same mindset. And then I actually was working with a guy who had worked with Carter, and his name is Thurman. I won't go too much into it. Very large, very, 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 what's the word? Imposing looking character. Grew up in the Cabrini Greens area. Knows gangs very well, and he was pretty much Carter's sidekick when they went looking for all this white supremacy activity. And when they reported it, if I'm correct with the way the story goes, when they reported it to the commander at the Pentagon, if you remember, Togo West was in charge at the time. And Carter and them said, look, we got a bigger problem. We found a lot of gang members. And he said, well, I'm not going to, he said, you don't expect me to tell a black man that we have a problem with black soldiers. Thurman kind of took offense to that and said, we don't. We have a problem with gang members. And the answer was same difference, which, let's just say, put Thurman in a bad situation because he was not happy. He expressed himself. And then it wasn't long after that they took Thurman out of CID and put him over in MPI. But so Thurman used to work with me. I used to work a lot with those guys. In fact, Thurman and I are still very close. We're like brothers. And we saw this for years. So Thurman was one of those few people who said, yes, you can use the military to escape gang life, but the truth is you can never go home. And what he means like that, same thing with, I'm no longer an alcoholic, but I like to hang out at the bars.
Right.
That's not going to work. You're going to go back to drinking. And we saw that. We saw a lot of that. Thurman, and of course, like people who dealt with something, who are ex-smokers or the worst people to be around if you light a cigarette. And but we know that when Thurman and I sat down and we kind of went over all the cases that we had that were gang members and soldiers, we had over 100 cases, and that's just that's, if you're thinking about it, it's just the ones we caught. I mean, we weren't, and the thing is we looked over that and we said, well, how many of these guys do you think really wanted to leave gang life behind? And I said 2, and Thurman was at 4. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He was way above me. That didn't want to leave. That actually wanted to leave the gang life. I'm sorry, reverse. I gave it a much higher number. Thurman gave it a lower number. He didn't believe in him, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh. And here's the thing: during the war, during the outbreak after 9/11, things got really, really bad because they needed numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how that kind of stuff happens. And I can remember MPI calling me one time, and I had to go up and see the division commander of the 82nd, and the young man that was working with me. MPI, great officers. I knew some really great guys. OSI was absolutely dynamic with the Air Force. And we went over there, and there was a young man. He had actually already served once overseas. He was a grunt, 11B, and he was a Latin King. His roommate was very, very nervous around this guy, very uncomfortable, the whole 9 yards. And we went down to interview him. I remember this very well. Went down to interview him. Nice kid, nice looking kid. And as I'm interviewing him, he recognizes, that you remember this from when you worked. Gang members, they're very earthy people, so they recognize somebody who understands them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the soldiers, the MPIs, the military guys were interviewing him, and he keeps looking up at me, and then I would ask him a question. He would answer me truthfully. And I said, well, how long you been in the Latin Kings? He goes, I was born into the Latin Kings. And I go, okay. And he said, I asked him, I said, well, wait a minute. So where did you join? And he goes, oh, in New York City. And I said, uh-huh. And then as he starts to describe it, I go, wait. In what capacity were you in physically when you were recruited? And he goes, oh, I was in handcuffs. I go, you were in handcuffs? And then he proceeds to tell me that the recruiter would come down to the guys awaiting trial and make them an offer. And I said, so wait a minute. So you were getting ready to go to court? And he goes, yeah. And I said, for what? And he goes, I pulled a knife on a police officer.
Oh.
I said, I don't know if this recruiter understood that child has a problem with leadership.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the only one. We ran across a lot of these over the years. Getting those numbers. I had one guy had a huge tattoo on his belly, told me, the recruiter's wife came in and she does makeup, and they put makeup over my belly for when we took the picture. That was when they started doing the picture thing.
Yeah.
Then I had the Air Force send me one time, and I mean, this dude was a bone thug. There was no two ways. I mean, all his tattoos were right out of New Orleans, where I'm from. I knew everyone. I knew the ward he was talking about. I knew everything. This guy was a GD to hell and back. He was a GD in the Crescent City, and they sent me a picture, and they go, do you think that I didn't even, I taught OSI a long time. They're great guys. And they sent me this picture, and they said, do you think this guy is a gang member? And I wrote back, do you think he's not a gang member? All right. I mean, that guy, that looked a picture out of prison. And and it was after Katrina. Records were destroyed, and this guy had gotten in, and it was actually I never tell them, don't tell me what facility you're at, because I don't want to know. Just tell me, And they go, well, he was in a very a situation or a place that we didn't really want him to be, and they mostly act out, and that's something I'd really like to bring up, when they talk about the white supremacy or the Nazis and stuff like that, and what's the failure to the military of finding these guys? Well, first of all, they're very small in numbers, the white supremacists. They're very, very small in numbers, and they're smart as far as they're not on post creating problems. They've come there to learn how to be a soldier and to secretly recruit. All right. TJ Layden, a good friend of mine who passed away several years ago, was at one time white supremacist of the year before he had his change. and all that. And he joined the Marine Corps. He was sent into the Marine Corps for that sole purpose, was to recruit. He had a big set of SS bolts on his neck. And but yeah, so they're there to learn how to be soldiers. So they come up when it would be amazing. I don't care. You could walk up to a black first sergeant and go, "We're here to see here to see you about Sergeant Thompson," and he'd go, "That's one of the best soldiers I got." And because they don't demonstrate their hatred, they don't demonstrate their extremist views, because they're there for a totally different purpose. Now, gangs, as you've heard me talk about it before, gangs are like religion. If you were a good Baptist in Tupelo, Mississippi, and you join the Army, you'll probably try and find a Baptist church while you go through training. But if you can't, by the time you get to where you're going and things settle out, you got a room and you got a daily routine, you're going to go find a Baptist church in town wherever you're stationed. And so you can continue on. Gang members are the same way. Gang member comes out of Los Angeles. I don't care wherever he comes from. We shouldn't just use Los Angeles because they're everywhere. But and once he gets into the military, yeah, sure, in basic training, he may not act out. AIT, he may not act out. Airborne school, he doesn't act out. But once he got time on his hands, he's going to go find other like-minded people. And if he can't find them on post, he's going to go off post to find them. Ran across it on a regular basis, nothing new, nothing out, nothing. Yeah, it was always common. It was not uncommon to run across a guy who was proudly tell you he was a gang member, and thinking that wasn't going to mean anything to us. And then one of them told us one time, where I come from, cops don't tell gang members what to do. Gang members tell cops what to do. Heard that a lot. And we tell them, well, not here.
Yeah.
It was funny. But we saw a lot. We had murders committed by them. We've had theft, a lot of theft. I can still remember, what was that, years ago, I went out to Harnett County, which is on the other side of Fort Bragg from us. And I was just over at their sheriff's office, and they go, "Hey, Gator, let us show you something." I was kind of well known as a gang guy, and that's what they say anyway. So I went over and I'm looking. They got all these, like I told you, everything's problem solving, right? That's what people don't understand. They think no, the best detective is the best problem solver. That's all.
Yes.
And so I remember going over there, and there was like I think about 18 pieces of body armor, brand new body armor that had just come out. It was that turtle shell crap, and I'm looking at it and I go, "Where in the hell did you get this?" They go, we got it off of some MS-13 we hit. I said, "This shit's still brand new. It's still in its plastic bag." But immediately, because I'm an old soldier, I looked at it and I said, there's a problem here. We're over in the desert. We're in the sandbox, and this is leaf camouflage, woodland camouflage. And I said, that hit me, and it made me think. And I'm sitting there going, okay, so now I start thinking, where in the hell could I make off with that much body armor, brand new body armor, and no one really notice? Because that's a lot of body armor to go miss. And I was like, okay, let me think about that. And I kept thinking about it. And then, of course, like I told you, I'm a shit magnet. So things just come to me. First thing that came to me was I got back to the office and I had a guy call me. He was a probation officer. And, of course, most people don't realize people on parole are not allowed to have body armor. They don't seem to understand that. You're not allowed to own body armor. It doesn't have, if you're a felon, you can't buy body armor, and it is a violation of your probation. So this old country boy calls me from a little country town. And he says, "Are you Detective Glass?" I said, "I am." He goes, "I think you can help me." And I said, I love this old boy because of the way he thought. He says, I said, "What can I do for you?" He goes, "Well, you know something about these gangs people, right?" And I go, "I do." He goes, "Well, I violated a gang member up here who had body armor. but it was some of that Army body armor. I said, okay. He says, I said, so that, that I went, oh, interesting, body armor. But of course, I've seen stolen body armor too.
Yeah.
Or pawned body armor, that kind of thing. So I didn't jump on it immediately. I was like, oh, okay. And he goes, so I contacted those CID people on Fort Bragg, and this young man came out and he collected the body armor. But I needed a receipt from him so that I can violate this old boy. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm still trying to figure out how I'm certainly not a liaison at this point. The CID hated me. And I'm sure I had a picture of that through darts at. But anyway, I said, oh, okay. So how do I come into this? He said, well, I called up there and they kept giving me a story that the boy wasn't there, or this or that. Then they said he was deployed. And I said, I'm still trying to figure out my part. I go, so how do I come into this? He goes, well, I figured you knew something because when I called, I got a guy and he said, do you know Detective Glass? And he said, I really don't. I recognize the name. And he said, well, he don't need to know nothing about this. So I figured you must know something about it. I say, oh, okay, that makes sense. So at the same time, I had I was a liaison a lot for the Special Forces guys, Green Berets. They were, I was there. They were buddies of mine.